Breathe out, breathe in, breathe out.
Please join me again in the spirit of meditation or prayer. Each movement we make, forward, backward, sideways, might be the start of a journey that will take us places we may have never imagined, anticipated, or prepared for. Each departure might lead toward ideas, insights, inspirations that would not have been possible or even conceivable had we remained mired in the narrow confines of our former lives. Each moment of disequilibrium, of falling and catching ourselves, might result in the first step towards something entirely new, something that has long remained obscured from our view. Let us take a moment of silence to consider the journeys of our lives, those that have brought us to this place, and those that will lead us on. May our lives be blessed with the awareness of the journey that we are on. May our journeying lead us to a place of peace, freedom, and understanding. And may we be ever grateful for our traveling companions on the road of life. Amen. I grew up with some rather pronounced perfectionist tendencies. As a child in school, I remember experiencing a huge amount of frustration and disappointment when I got anything wrong. Even if I got 95 out of 100 on the test, I would focus on the 5 wrong rather than the 95 right. This may sound familiar to some of you. I remember crying if I couldn't master a certain skill in a short period of time. And I expected my teachers to be, if not perfect, then at least reasonably free from big mistakes. The biggest trouble I got into in 5th grade occurred when I corrected my teacher when she made a mistake in diagramming a sentence on the blackboard. To be fair, I felt compelled to correct her in part because she had very unjustly told a fellow student that her answer to this particular problem was wrong when it was actually right. So I was acting to correct an injustice as well as to correct something that was less than perfect. Looking back, I think I might have been something of a challenge to my teachers and my parents. And unfortunately, this tendency did not disappear altogether after I grew up. When I make a mistake still, it can take sometimes days for me to let it go. And it still irks me, at least a tiny bit, when I see someone put up something on social media or in an email that is just plain wrong. One of my favorite cartoons from a magazine shows a man sitting upright in bed, feverishly typing on his laptop while his wife asks him to go to sleep. And he replies, "I can't go to sleep. Someone is wrong on the internet." Some years ago, when I started seminary, I realized that I was going to have to adjust my expectations of myself and my expectations of others if I was going to have any chance of completing that process. Because I was taking a full load of classes while also working full-time, helping to raise our daughter, and doing a part-time internship, it became clear that I could not expect perfection of myself or those around me. There simply were not enough hours in the day to be anything like perfect or expect others to be perfect. The underlying spiritual issue associated with this problem has to do with self-worth. If my sense of worthiness is dependent upon being flawless, then I am setting myself up for a lifetime of disappointment and unhappiness. Likewise, if my acceptance of others depends upon their acting the way I want them to act to meet my ideal of perfection, I'm not going to have any friends, nor will I be content with any of my relationships, personal or professional. What I'd like us to remember is that imperfection is not just something that we have to put up with, whether with ourselves or others, but that imperfection is in fact a central and essential characteristic of being human, and it is something that we must embrace. This is not to say that we should have low standards of behavior or performance for ourselves or others, not at all. Rather, we must remember that our standards are a goal and not a prerequisite for loving ourselves or others. And if perfection is our standard, we are turning away from an important part of being human. Striving for absolute perfection is obviously a problem for us as individuals, but it's also a problem for us as members of a religious community. There was a minister one Sunday who was preaching on the truth that no one is perfect. To prove his point, he asked anyone in the congregation who was perfect to please stand up. You have to be careful sometimes what you ask for. The minister was somewhat shocked when one woman, in fact, stood up in the middle of the congregation. And he asked this woman, "Do you really think that you are perfect?" The woman replied, "Oh no, I'm standing up on behalf of my husband's first wife, who apparently never did anything wrong." That might sound familiar too. When we hold people up to impossible or even unreal standards, we are effectively pushing them out of relationship with ourselves. We're putting up an impenetrable curtain between us and them. One of the central pillars of Unitarian Universalism is the concept of covenant. Because ours is a non-creedal religious tradition, covenant, the things that we promise to aspire to, are far more important than our individual beliefs. Beliefs tend to be rigid, while aspirations tend to be more flexible. As the famous Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams said, "We become human by making commitments, by making promises. Paraphrasing the Jewish theologian Martin Buber, Adams called humans the promise-making, promise-keeping, promise-breaking, promise-renewing creatures. In other words, in making promises to one another, we are not promising or expecting perfection from ourselves or from others. Central to the concept of covenant is the expectation that the covenant will, in fact, be broken, and not just once in a while, but many times. Embracing our imperfections means not only being okay with being less than perfect, but understanding that our imperfection helps us live into the really important things that we aspire to be more loving, more compassionate, and more kind to ourselves and to others. Expecting perfection actually makes us less likely to be successful in achieving those things to which we aspire. It's especially sad when we try to make our children perfect, try to make sure that by the time they reach middle school, they'll be ready to complete their Ivy League college application. The popular writer and researcher Brené Brown says that making ourselves or our children perfect is not our job. She says our job is to say, you know what? You are imperfect and you're wired for struggle, but you are worthy of love and belonging. You're imperfect and you're wired for struggle, but you are worthy of love and belonging. I can hear echoes of our first principle in that statement, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And this worth is not based on any standard of perfection, but rather based on the expectation of the perfect imperfection of all human beings. A story is told about Adam and Eve after they were thrown out of the garden. From the day Adam and Eve were exiled from the Garden of Eden, they lived together east of Eden, tilling the earth, raising children, and struggling to stay alive. After those many years of struggle, when their children were grown, Adam and Eve decided to take a journey before it was too late to see the world. They journeyed from one corner of the world to the other and explored all of the world's wonders that they could find. They stood on the tops of great mountains, trekked across vast deserts, walked amid mighty forests, and traversed the magnificent seas. They watched the sun rise over the endless wilderness and saw it set into the boundless ocean. In the course of their journeys, wandering from place to place, they came upon a place that seemed familiar. And they came upon the Garden of Eden, from which they had been exiled on the very first day of their lives. The garden was now guarded by an angel with a flaming sword. This frightened Adam and Eve, who fled. Suddenly they heard a voice imploring them, "My children, you have lived in exile these many, many years. Your punishment is complete. Come now and return to my garden. Come home to the garden." Suddenly, too, the angel disappeared. The way into the garden was opened, and God invited them in. But Adam, having spent so many years in the world, had grown shrewd. He hesitated and said to God, "You know, it has been so many years. Remind me, what is it like in the garden?" "The garden is paradise," God responded. "In the garden there is no work. You need never struggle or toil again. In the garden there is no pain, no suffering. In the garden there is no death. In the garden there is no time, no yesterday, no tomorrow, only an endless, Today, my children, return to the garden. Adam considered God's words. He thought about a life with no work, no struggle, no pain, no passage of time, and no death. An endless life of ease with no tomorrow and no yesterday. And then he turned and looked at Eve, his wife. He looked into the face of the woman with whom he had struggled to make a life, to take food from the earth, to raise children, to build a home. He read in the lines of her face all the tragedies they had overcome and the joys they had cherished. He saw in her eyes all the laughter and all the tears they had shared. Eve looked back into Adam's face. She saw in his face all the moments that had formed their lives, moments of jubilant celebration and moments of unbearable pain. She remembered the moments of life-changing crisis and many moments of simple tenderness and love. She remembered the moments when a new life arrived in their world and the moments when death intruded. As all their shared moments came back to her, she took Adam's hand in hers. Looking into his wife's eyes, Adam shook his head and responded to God's invitation. "No, thank you," he said. "That's not for us, not now. We don't need that now. Come on, Eve," he said to his wife, "let's go home." And Adam and Eve turned their backs on God's paradise and walked home. In their wonderful book, The Spirituality of Imperfection, Ernest Kurtz and Kit Ketchum wrote that home is ultimately the place where we find the peace and harmony that comes from learning to live with the knowledge of our own imperfections and learning to accept the imperfections of others. It was this home that Adam and Eve chose for themselves when they turned their backs on paradise. Perfection is not a goal that is worthy for us as human beings. A far worthier goal is to work to be true to that which we love. The people, the places, the institutions that are important parts of our lives. To aspire to do our best to uphold these things, and when we fall short, to embrace our imperfection as an essential part of ourselves and those whom we love. I hope and pray that we might all learn to be imperfectly happy, not striving to be perfect, but rather striving to be the best and truest version of ourselves that we can be in this moment. In doing so, each of us will be a blessing to ourselves and to one another, imperfect beings in an imperfect world. May it be so. Amen.
Please rise again to join in singing our mashup of Jacob's Ladder and Sarah's Circle.
We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are
Thank you. Please be seated.
Our Share the Plate beneficiary for the month of May is Community Care in Resistance in Pittsburgh, or CCRIP. CCRIP provides direct aid to people in the Pittsburgh area returning home from incarceration in the Allegheny County Jail. They have a table outside the jail where they offer aftercare and supplies to individuals getting out of jail, making sure that they at least have some money and a ride home. 100% of all donations go toward purchasing supplies. If you'd like to make a gift via our online giving system, you can do so by going to sunnyhill.org and click on the button that says Online Giving, or you can give by text at 412-324-3130. We'll be passing our offering baskets for cash and checks in just a moment. Please join me in saying the words to extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
We'll close with these words. We call for this blessing on all sheltered here, whether in body or in spirit. May the flame of our community ignite a love bold enough to share. And in return, may we all be embraced by a love that remains constant in times of sorrow and in days of great gladness. Go in peace.